Yeah, thank you for being a mentor for a year. Last year you were, and I'm gonna keep saying that until I bore you. Hearing that.
We know it was really a fun year. That was my first year of being a mentor through the SMDP program. So just being able to provide what I've done, kind of some of my experiences, but also hear some of the things that other individuals have to go through just to get in, kind of what's going on in the pre-workforce is not the right word, but what's going on in the workforce, just trying to get into an MSL or medical affairs position has been interesting because I came in through a different route.
Wow.
So it was a great learning experience for me too, just to kind of find out what some of the challenges are, what some of the barriers are.
Good. So it seems like this medical science liaison, as I find out, is a lot of people want to get into it. It's very competitive. And on the other side of it, many people don't know what medical science liaison is. And you have that role. You're one of the best individuals that can tell us what the medical science liaison is, because you're actually a medical science liaison. So who is a medical science liaison?
It's really a neat role. And to go back historically, drug companies for years, they get the drug produced somewhere in a laboratory. Might be a company laboratory, or might be an external laboratory such as a university or NIH or something like that. Once they decide the molecule looks good, it's time to take it to clinical trials. They'll do the clinical trials. And then once it gets approved, that approval process is kind of like a back and forth discussion with the FDA. And the FDA finally gives you what they call authorization to market the medication. And that authorization to market is your actual medication indication. And then once you have your indication, drug companies for years have utilized sales reps, drug reps, or other terms to go out and actually sell the product. And the way they sell or promote the product is going out, promoting what the product is good for, and staying completely within that indication. So the only thing the drug rep could come and talk to you about is what's actually in the physical package insert. And back in the early 90s, I think Lilly was the one that kind of realized we've got some medications out here that clinicians need additional information on. They don't have all of the information because it's not in the package insert, so the reps can't get it out there. So how do we get this important information out? So they developed this role of medical science liaison, and that medical science liaison was really targeted to just getting scientific information into the hands of clinicians. So it was a way of making sure you as a clinician knew what this medication, knew where the medication had been studied, what diseases it had been studied in, and maybe a more encompassing picture of the adverse events and some of the side effects that didn't necessarily show up in the package insert. So it's a way to kind of expand information, but not promote it, because it's not on label, it's not on indication. So they can't go out and promote it. They just want to make sure you're aware of that information. So it's more of an awareness, having the scientific discussion. That role eventually developed into the MSL, being the individual who would talk to the clinicians and then come back to the drug company and say, well, here's what the clinicians are struggling with, or here's what clinicians need. So they're able to bring that information back into the company and potentially help shape the strategy of what we need to look at in the future, where we need to take this medication and what kind of studies we need to do to either show it works, it doesn't work. We've got additional adverse events that we didn't think of before. So it's been kind of a nice role in helping get some of the medications, let's say, developed and fine-tuned, and then get them expanded into other areas where they may have activity. And they're within the company, you'll actually have those two roles. You'll have medical affairs, which has nothing to do with sales. So if we sell one or we sell 100,000, our salary doesn't change. And then the sales reps are the individuals whose salaries can actually change based on how much of the medication is sold. So they're really incentivized to sell, and medical science liaisons are incentivized just to make sure the information's out there and gets in the hands of the right people.
Good, good. Thank you so much for saying that. There's something that you said that is very interesting that most people don't know. People that know about medical science liaison, they they think it's a sales job, and you just said it's not. And when I was reading through the history of medical science liaison, I read that medical science liaison usually they they usually work closely with the sales in the past, and they actually do some sales job in the past. And definitely that has changed over time. Based on your own experience, why do you think that's very important to say, well, we have to separate this? This is medical science liaison, this is sales, because it was not like that at the beginning.
It has changed when the FDA kind of teamed up with the Office of Inspector General, or OIG, and started looking at the way some medications were actually presented to clinicians. And anytime you're going off label, that has to be in a scientific discussion realm. And that's why today you see almost all medical science liaisons have a scientific background and not a sales background, because you're having those scientific discussions. And anytime you're having one of those scientific discussions, if you're doing it in such a way that it looks like you might be promoting a medication and that promotion is outside the label, that's where you get into these off-label promotions. Office of Inspector General kind of comes in every once in a while and hands you this big multi-million-dollar fine. You get put under what they call a corporate integrity agreement, or a CIA, which then really stops a lot of your sales activity, or severely restricts your sales activity for a period of time. So it's really important to distinguish those two roles and make sure sales stay strictly on label, and anything that's scientific outside the label has to be done by a scientific person. And of course, that's the medical affairs side of the business.
Good, good. Thank you so much for clarifying that. That's very important. And based on all this, it's important to know that medical science liaison, they have many roles within this particular goal that they're trying to achieve for the company. In your own opinion, what is the singular most important role of a medical science liaison?
I think the single most important role is having that scientific background, and then being able to go in and have those truly scientific discussions, and not going in with the sales pitch from the drug company that's, here's our medication, here's why it's the best thing around, but coming in and saying, okay, what do you think about it? What are we missing? What information do you need that we're not providing that we might have somewhere? Or what information do you need that we don't have that we need to go out and do a clinical study so we can create that? So really understanding what's missing out there where clinicians are practicing, because I think that's one of the ways the medical science liaison really has an impact on patient care, is to make sure that clinicians have the information they need to provide the best care to the patient they can.
Oh, wow. Thank you so much for sharing that. One of the things that I've also learned from you and from many other people that have medical science liaison that I've done informational interview with is the fact that this role is really heavy on building relationship with a key opinion leader. And I know that this is something that not everybody has. In your own opinion, do you think building relationship is something that people can develop or learn, or it's either you have it or you don't have it?
Honestly, I think some people are born with it. Probably the ones that are born with it are on the extrovert side. There are those of us who are on the introvert side, so it takes us a little bit longer to develop that skill and still have to work at it. But I honestly think it's one of those skills that anybody can learn. With some people, it just takes a little more practice than others. And obviously, there's lots of research now that goes into how to have conversations, how to get to know the person that you're trying to talk to, figure out how they want to be interacted with, and be able to interact and change the way that you speak, maybe change your tone, change your posture, just so you can make the individual you're talking to feel a little more comfortable. So it's, and that's one of the problems, I think, if we're trying to communicate through text or trying to communicate through email, it's difficult to have those kind of conversations. But, a face-to-face conversation, even through the video, you can kind of get a feel for whether or not your message is coming across, whether they're listening to you. You've completely lost them, so you need to figure out a different approach or a different attack. So it's kind of a nice way of really honing your communication skills. But I do think it's something that just about anybody could learn if they're willing to practice.
Wow, interesting. Thank you for making that clear. You said something about the modes of communication with the key opinion leader just now. And I'm wondering, based on your own experience, what is the preferred mode of communication that the key opinion leaders always try to drift towards?
Years ago, before COVID, we did all of our interactions face-to-face. And that was really the focus, is to get face-to-face. So in a face-to-face, in front of each other conversation, it's kind of easy to keep things going, change directions if you have to. And it's also easier to keep someone's attention. Through a video chat, it's pretty easy to get lost in multitasking. Nowadays, everybody has 2 or 3 screens, so there's probably another screen or 2 that they're watching as they're having this. So that has made the video piece more difficult. But when COVID hit, it's kind of where we were forced to go. So everybody went virtual. Now that we're back in the realm of where we could do face-to-face, and I think that's what a lot of companies would prefer, we still have a lot of clinicians that like the virtual. It's just easy to get into, easy to get out of. And for those of us who had to travel to face-to-face visits, it's much easier now for the clinician to say, something has come up. I've got a late patient in the clinic. Can we reschedule? So they don't feel nearly as bad about you taking a plane ride out there just for them to cancel on you. So I think a lot of clinicians are comfortable with virtual. Obviously, when you go to congresses and other meetings, the face-to-face meetings are great. But in light of not being able to do that, or being able to do that easily, a lot of people are now preferring virtual.
Wow, interesting. So my question, as a follow-up question to that, is, so when you do the virtual meeting and you get some insight from that, and another opportunity you had, you went there in person, when you bring the insights back on both cases, when you bring it back to the company, do they consider the virtual insights less valuable, or did they put it at the same level?
They're really put at the same level. And insights are kind of an interesting piece of our business. And the insights, you'll hear a lot of people refer to as the MSL's currency. Mm-hmm. If we're not bringing insights back, we're probably not doing anything and ought to be looking for a different job, is kind of the whole basis behind that currency. But the insights are really, they either bring in information where the clinicians are saying, yes, you're doing the right thing. We've got everything we need. This medication is great for this disease. We're not seeing anything new. But I think the more informative insights are when you go out and you start talking about the medication. They say, well, have you thought about using it in this disease? Have you thought about using this dosage form or this dosage route or this dosing schedule? Or we're starting to see a lot of these adverse events pop up that weren't in the clinical trials. And that's probably one of the more important things that I think the MSLs and the whole medical affairs department brings, is looking at things that were not apparent in the clinical trials. But as far as virtual versus a face-to-face, there's really no difference in the insight. It's just the information that's being brought back that might get looked at differently.
Wow. Wow. Interesting. Thank you for sharing that. You also mentioned something that is very interesting to me. The medical science liaison doing their work or not doing their work, and they might have to get another job if the person is not bringing in insight. And the question around that is, how do you measure the performance of medical science liaison based on the insight and their relationship with key opinion leaders? How do you know somebody that is doing a good job and someone that's doing a bad job?
You know, that's the question I think everybody in the whole medical affairs department struggles with. We're just, by nature, as humans, we really like to measure things, whether it's to find out how well somebody else is doing, or honestly to find out how well we match up to what other people are doing. We just like to have numbers. And within medical affairs, a lot of the measurements are done with the number of meetings you have. You'll keep what's known as a KOL list or a KEE list, or lots of these other terms that can be used. But you'll have that list, and then you'll be measured on the number of times you meet with those specific individuals. There's numbers about how many insights you bring back, how many meetings you go to. So there's a whole realm of things that people are trying to measure. And honestly, when you get into lots of different medical affairs discussions, I think everybody's kind of struggling with the same thing. How do we measure it and tell somebody's doing it well? But personally, I think when I can go in and have a discussion and open up a clinician's mind to something else they weren't considering before, that's where I think a lot of us in medical affairs really feel like we're doing what we're supposed to do. And if you look at, there's statistics about, say 60 years ago, it would take about 10 years for our knowledge base to double. You get into the 90s, it was down to about 5 years for our knowledge base to double. We're to the point now where our knowledge base, and that's just everything we know about everything, doubles in about 2 weeks. So just kind of keeping that in mind when you look at what a clinician is trying to do, there's absolutely no way they could keep up with every article coming out about cancer treatment. And even if you specialize in breast cancer, there's no way you could keep up with every single breast cancer article that's coming out and treat patients at the same time. So having said that, I think that's really where medical affairs really has an important role to play, because we're the ones that understand what our internal information says about our medications. So we just need to make sure we're getting out there and getting that information into the hands of clinicians, not convincing them to use our medication, but just giving them the information so they can weigh it against another company's and decide which medication is best for this particular patient.
Oh, interesting. That's a very difficult conversation to have. Like say, oh, this is the good thing about this drug, but I'm not expecting you to use it. So you guys have to actually say that clearly, that I'm not trying to sell something to you, but I'm just telling you these are the advantages and the disadvantages of this drug.
I think in a nutshell, that's a great way to explain it. And even as clinicians may not necessarily understand the role of the medical science liaison. So we often, as MSLs, the very first time we meet somebody, have to go in and tell them what our role is. And we generally distinguish ourselves from the sales reps by going in and saying, well, the sales reps come in, they're the ones that bring you the lunches, they're the ones that bring you all of the tools to make sure you have access to the medication, and they tell you everything on label. But when you've got all these questions about adverse events that aren't in the package insert, or use of this medication in another disease state, they can't tell you any of that information. But I, as the MSL, can if you ask me. And that's maybe another important point, is I can't necessarily call up you as a clinician and say, hey, this article was just published, can we talk about it? Because that, in a way, is promoting something that's off label. But if you come in to me, email, call, whatever, and say, I just read this article or heard about this article, can you come in and we can talk about it? Then that's a fair conversation. That's something that the MSL can do, because it's no longer me proactively promoting a product, but I'm reacting to your question. So we get into this proactive versus reactive conversation.
Wow. Interesting. You just mentioned something now. I thought it was a joke when I was at the medical science liaison meeting. The salesperson bringing lunch.
You'll have a lot of that goes on. And obviously what they're trying to do is make sure they have FaceTime with everybody that is potentially going to talk to the patient about that medication. And generally, one of the ways you can get people to come is bring them something to eat.
Okay, okay. Yeah, I didn't know it was a real thing. I thought you were trying to make jokes when we were at the medical science liaison conference. Oh, that's good to
And
know.
jokingly, you'll hear people talk about that as we're bribing people to come and listen.
Mhm.
I wouldn't go that far, but I think
Yeah,
just within the clinic, everything is so busy. If the clinicians have to stop and listen to you, it might as well be convenient. They could stop and listen to you and eat lunch at the same time. So you're not taking away from their ability to perform their duties in the clinic. You're being able to provide two things at once.
good, good, good. And I think one of the things that people also said, excuse me, during the conference was lunchtime is probably most of the good time to meet with the key opinion leaders, because then you can have conversation with them for 1 hour, and if they're eating their lunch. But then my question is, typically, if you're not catching them during their lunchtime, how much typically do you get from key opinion leaders the first or the second time without having lunch?
I think it really depends on whether you've met them before and how well you know them. But if you're trying to go in and meet with somebody the very first time, you're probably going to spend a little more time just getting to know them getting to know you, and you making sure that they understand what you can bring. And obviously, you're going to come in with probably your one or two high points that you're discussing as a company at that time, just really to show them what you can bring. But as that relationship goes on, you may be able to get 10 or 15 minutes with them between appointments, even though it's not during the lunchtime, to just share the information that you've come up with, information that they're interested in knowing about, or you're needing to get something from them. So there's maybe some burning question your company has about a new product or something that they've heard. So they're trying to get clarity. So you're going out and you're talking to the clinicians about that particular point from the company. And I think that's where building that relationship becomes more important, because you're able to get that information, you're able to get that meeting, and they know it's going to be a quick meeting. Now, there are clinicians that you get involved with that you may actually go out to dinner with, go out to breakfast with. So you'll develop these relationships over time, and then they become, there's certainly still a work relationship, a clinical relationship, but there's a little more personality to it.
Good, good. Wow, it's very interesting to know that. And my question is, how do you draw the line out as to how much personal you can get when trying to develop that kind of conversation? You know the kind of questions you can ask when you're trying to get to know somebody, and what are the signs that, okay, it's time to just ask the scientific question?
I think that's really where you have to go in with your set of objectives and just understand what you want to get out of this meeting. And you don't want to go in and just, I'm going to meet my objectives and leave, but want to make sure that we're having this nice human interaction, this enjoyable interaction. We're both enjoying being there and having fun with the discussion. And that's where some of these non-scientific discussions really get into being fun. You talk about possibilities, you talk about theories, and maybe some of these hypothesis generating ideas that may eventually develop into a big study or a brand new medication. But those kind of conversations, you really, I would say, approach those just like you'd approach any other conversation with a new colleague, and how deeply you want to become friends.
Good, good. So probably watching their body languages and things like that, just like you said.
I think certainly all those soft skills of body language, if you ask them a question, they start squirming, you're probably heading down the wrong direction. If you ask them a question and their eyes light up and they get a big smile, okay, you're probably headed down the right direction, and keep it going.
Keep it going. Good. Thank you so much. Thank you for sharing that. Those are soft skills that is really important. One of the things that is also very important to know is, now that we know more about medical science liaison role, what are the organizations, what are the companies that actually request or develop the medical science liaison role?
Really, any company that's involved with producing medication that has to be FDA approved probably has some form of a medical science liaison or medical affairs department. And when you get into medical affairs departments, you'll have lots of different positions within that medical affairs department with from company to company. The job descriptions may be pretty close to the same, but the titles may be completely different. So that's always one thing to kind of keep in mind. But anytime you're dealing with a medication that goes through FDA approval, you're going to be restricted to selling that medication and providing information through the sales force to what is indicated or what's approved by the FDA. So all of the other information that happened in the clinical trial that got it approved, as well as all the other clinical trials that are being done, is kept in-house at the company and can't be shared unless somebody asks for that information. And that's maybe another key point is the drug companies have a lot of information internally, but they can't necessarily go out and just actively provide that information because it kind of looks like they're getting into off-label promotion. But a lot of this information is provided through research articles, journal articles, and the other publications that are done around a clinical trial. But again, trying to keep up with all of that as a clinician, you don't know what's out there, where to go look. That's part of what the MSLs can do, is bring all of that information together and say, here's what we've got now that we're talking about this new medication, this new adverse event that's popped up, or some new idea that you have for studying. So we're able to bring the information that the company has internally out externally as long as it's requested by somebody.
Good. Thank you so much for sharing that. You just mentioned drug company, clinical trials, and how drugs have been developed and things like that. So around that, the question that I have around that is, what is the difference between the blockbuster drug and the orphan drug?
Blockbuster drugs are the medications that come out and they hit a certain sales level. And these are the medications that would treat, let's say, diabetes. The SGLP or the GLP-1 medications are really hitting the market for diabetes. They discovered that these drugs have a lot of weight loss potential. So now you're seeing advertisements not only for diabetes, but for weight loss. And knowing that we have a certain number of individuals with diabetes, a certain number of individuals with weight loss, you add both of those up, you're going to sell a lot of this medication. And being able to sell a lot of it puts it in this blockbuster category just based on the dollar value. Orphan drugs are drugs that are utilized to treat indications or treat medical conditions that occur in a very small percentage of the population. So these are the medications that you're not going to sell a lot of. In fact, you're probably not going to be able to sell enough of it to make up for all of the research and development that went into developing that one medication. And that's, I think that's another issue with medication development, is you come up with one medication on the market, you've probably had 2 or 3 tries at getting something else there in that same category that just didn't work. So there's a lot of money that you spent that you'll never make up. So you're trying to make up for all of that investment on this one medication you get approved. And when you try and do that with an orphan drug that's going to be used in a very small patient population, it's much more difficult. And of course, that's why the FDA has given it orphan status. There's some patent protections and some selling protections around an orphan drug. And orphan drugs, for that reason, are often much more expensive than just your regular medications.
Wow. Well, thank you so much for sharing that. You just said something about drugs, spending money, cost, and things like that. And that made me to think about the 5 Ps of medical affairs: the provider, the patients, the payer, policymaker. How does this connect within the context of medical affairs?
Well, that could be another whole year's worth of podcast in and of itself. I think when you're looking at the way that medications get developed in this country, they get developed in such a way that the drug company has to figure out what it's going to cost them to approve it, to get it on the market. And then they're going to figure out what they have to charge to make up for that before the next medication hits the market. So sounds like a relatively straightforward formula until now you bring the insurance company into this. And the insurance companies, for the most part, are the ones paying for these medications, but they're not necessarily part of the decision factor. And what I mean by that is if you go in to buy a car, you're the person bringing in the cash to buy the car, and then you're talking directly to the salesperson who's going to sell you the car. But when you get into medicine, you're the person who's coming in to pick up that car, and you've got the physician who's the one that's going to sell you the car, in this case, medication. But the person bringing in the cash is the insurance company. So they're not even in the room as you're making this sale, but yet they have to pay for it. So obviously they want to have some control on the kind of money they're spending. Because I think if we were buying cars and somebody else was going to pay for the car, we'd probably all be driving the Mercedes.
Yes.
But if that's coming out of our own pocket, we're a little more selective. The insurance companies are trying to figure out how to be selective in the money that they're paying based on what medications work best for patients. And for oncology, they'll do this through pathways. And there are several different pathways that oncologists will follow. So it is kind of an interesting process in trying to figure out how you're going to get your medication to the market, how you're going to price it to make up all of your R&D cost, and honestly to pay for the salaries of the medical science liaisons and the sales reps that are out there. Because you're trying to figure out how to keep your business going so you can develop the next molecule. So obviously you've got to have a little profit built into that so you can continue to pay everybody in the research laboratory to create the next medication for sale.
Wow, interesting. That's a very clear and simple way to explain it. I got the analogy of buying a car. I think everybody can everybody can relate to that at some point. Because even if you don't want to buy a car, you have your bank reaching out to you that you should buy a new car. So
yeah.
Thank you for doing that. One of the terms that I also came across when it comes to medical science liaison is white paper. What's a white paper?
A white paper, when we're talking about general medications, there's kind of a range of white papers. You could have a white paper where you have a lot of the experts that get together and let's say, well, you've got your medication out here that's approved for cancer of the right big toe. And this is obviously a made up example. But clinicians are thinking, well, that based on the mechanism and what we've experienced, we think it would work for the left little toe just as well. So these experts can get together and create a white paper that goes through the evidence, maybe their experience, and come up with some conclusion about whether it would or wouldn't work. And here's the things that you need to consider. So it may help other clinicians make a decision, even though that information is not available yet and probably never will be available. I'm not sure you'd find a study that would go look for your medication in the left small toe cancer. So you've got these experts who get together, and based on their expertise, they will create these white papers. You'll also see white papers about adverse events. Generally, when medications come out, the adverse event profile that's in the package insert is based on everything that came out of the clinical trial. And our clinical trials are written in such a way now that the patient populations are smaller, they're more succinct, and you're able to get your trial endpoints done sooner. But in doing that, your volume of patients taking the medication isn't as great when it hits the market. So there's potentially a lot of adverse events you may not be catching in your trial, or you may have caught them but just don't have a signal that it's going to be an issue until that medication gets to market. So then once it gets to market, you'll have clinicians get together and they'll say, well, based on what we've seen with other medications, based on the experience we have with this patient population, we think these are some of the adverse events you need to consider. And we think maybe here's some of the ways that you could either prevent or treat those adverse events. So again, that white paper may bring in information that wasn't part of the clinical trial just because it wasn't designed that way, but it's still information that clinicians really need to know and understand to be able to utilize the medication safely. So it's in general, I guess these white papers are ways of experts getting together and trying to provide information that clinicians may need that you didn't address in your clinical trial.
Wow. Thank you. Thank you for answering that. It's a very detailed answer to that question. One of the things I still want to know more is, so when you meet with a key opinion leader, or KEE, and you mentioned KEE, what's that? What's the KEE?
You'll have, again, different terms at different companies. We will use KEE as a key external expert, or KOL as a key opinion leader. There's external scientific experts, and generally all of these terms are referring to individuals that you really want to target based on their influence of other clinicians. And it's always been kind of funny, I think, within medicine, there seems to be 3 levels of evidence. There is your level of evidence, your personal experience. There's the level of evidence that you haven't experienced this, but a clinician has. And then there's a level of evidence that comes from the drug company sponsored clinical trials, and they kind of rank in that order. And obviously part of what happens is you're seeing this patient here with this disease that you've never treated or you don't have any treatment for. So you generally go ask your neighbor clinician on how this works. And the key opinion leaders, or KEEs, are generally the people that others are going to and asking for advice. And you kind of identify these as, these are the individuals whose names are on majority of the articles coming out, majority of the clinical trials that get medications approved. So they're the names that a lot of people know because of what they've done within that particular field.
Wow. They are the authorities that people.
Really, they're the clinical or scientific authorities. That's a great way to put it.
Good. Thank you so much. So my question as a follow-up to that is that, so when you meet them, how often do they expect you to reach out to them?
Most of the individuals who we consider key opinion leaders know they're key opinion leaders, and they are the ones that everybody is trying to meet with. So if you've got a breast cancer key opinion leader, it's not just me, but it's my colleagues, it's other drug companies, MSLs, other drug companies reps that are trying to meet with them. And because they're getting so many of these calls, they kind of know that they are a key opinion leader. Most of those individuals really fit within the academic setting just because of the time component. So they're able to have more of those open meetings and potentially provide more information, but also have more influence. But these are the ones that really understand it. So you're kind of expected to meet with them once or twice a year. Certainly if you've got a new medication coming out, brand new mechanism of action, or brand new disease state, these are probably the people that you're expected to target pretty quickly, just because other people are going to be targeting them quickly. All of their colleagues are going to be calling on them pretty quickly. So you want to make sure you understand what they think about the medication and make sure that they have the right information about that medication.
Wow, interesting. It's very important you say that, because take, for example, if somebody just got employed as a medical science liaison and they have to start seeing key opinion leaders, and maybe they're moving from one territory to another territory, they're relocating to a new place. What are the support system that's available for this individual to start seeing the key opinion leaders that although they have the therapeutic experience, but then what are the resources that they can use? What are the tools they can use to know the key opinion leaders?
There's several different tools, and obviously most of us, if we move within a region, kind of understand who our colleagues are within the medical affairs profession. So these are great people to meet with. Obviously, as an MSL, you're going to have a drug rep counterpart somewhere. These are probably good people to meet with as well and find out who they think the targets are, or at least who their targets are and why. So that kind of helps you develop your list or your thought process. But then there are electronic tools, Viva Link, Monocle, and H1 are, I know, 3 of the tools that I have experience with. So these are things that you can go in, you can look disease states up, you can look regions, states, cities up, and do some of your research that way, find out what their publication record is, what their clinical trial record is. And then obviously getting on the NCI website kind of gives you a list of the trials that specific institutions are doing, and you can look up the principal investigators within those trials. And then certainly the websites that, if you're going to go call on UT Southwestern in Dallas, just go to their website, look up, for me, it would be all of the breast cancer docs, and start doing research on each of those docs and find out who's got the publication history, who's got the speaking history. So you kind of develop your own list. And if you're fortunate enough to be cross-covering with someone else, the individual who you're cross-covering with probably has some of these relationships, and they can do the introductions and they can do the handoffs as well. So you're not necessarily going in very first time, never having met this individual and them never having met you, trying to explain who you are, why you're coming in, or why you're the new person. So those personal handoffs go a long ways as well.
Wow, good. You just mentioned something that is very important, being a medical science liaison, working in a team. And if a new MSL is employed, that means they have to rely on the support from their team. Going back to when you first got your job or at any point, what was the best experience you have working in a team, and what was the most challenging part of working in a team?
I think one of the easiest parts of working in the team that I'm on, we have a mixture of individuals. We have clinical pharmacists, we have some physicians, we have several PhD researchers, and we also have some nurse practitioners. So we'll have team calls at least once a month. And it's great having that kind of a team, at least for me, because you get lots of different experiences, and you can come in with a question and generally get 2 or 3 different answers based on the history that person is coming in from. So it gives you a much better, much broader perspective on the question you just asked. So obviously that's a big help. I think one of the challenges was always having worked in an environment where you're surrounded by a lot of people. Moving into a work from home job, you're not surrounded by anyone anymore. So you become really good friends with the dog or the cat you've got, but your support system changes. And I think all of the colleagues that I have kind of understand that. They've all gone through the same kinds of changes. So you become a real good support system for each other. And it wasn't uncommon, especially during COVID, to have just an online virtual happy hour where everybody just gets together and goes through the kind of week they've had, the challenges they've had, what they have planned for the weekend. So just a way to kind of unwind, since you no longer have the water cooler to gather around. You're gathering around with your team on a video chat.
Wow,
but
excellent.
One of the biggest challenges.
Yes, and do you consider this the most challenging part of being a medical science liaison?
I'd say probably the most challenging part is learning to either, for lack of a better term, be ignored or hear no a lot, because we're always trying to meet with individuals we've met with before or know before, and lots of new individuals both. So you're sending out a lot of emails, making a lot of calls, trying to get that first meeting. And a lot of these emails go completely ignored. A lot of the emails get answered with, I don't have time or not interested at this point. So learning to take no or no response at all as not being personal. It's just part of what everybody's experienced. They're busy. They don't have time to answer. So just kind of ignore it.
Wow, wow, excellent. It's very important that people know this, and you just said it. I knew this before, but then based on this, how would you recommend that an organization or a company supports medical science liaison better because of all these challenges?
I think one of the things that really helps is just having others who have gone through the same experience and having them as mentors or as trainers and being able and willing to share that information so that you're not feeling alone. And I heard a quote recently attributed to C.S. Lewis. Generally, friendship starts when you hear, "You too? You mean I'm not the only one?" So having individuals who have been through it before, understand kind of what you're going through, and willing to sit down and talk to you, I think is probably one of the biggest things that medical affairs departments can do to support their medical affairs people.
Wow, wow, interesting. And one of the things I've also observed, challenges bring people together, and the common hatred of a thing, the common challenges that people go through, that's making them really feel down, also really bring people together, because then they can talk about it and they can talk about how they feel. Everybody can pour their heart out and try to empathize with the other person.
I think it's always comforting to know you're not the only one going through this. Somebody else has been through it before and they survived. So, okay, if they survived, I can probably survive as well, especially if they can give me some information.
Good, good. Thank you so much. We are gradually moving to the end now, but there's still a few questions I really want to ask you. I saw in your introduction how you have 11 years experience before you came into being a medical science liaison. But then my question is, how did you know medical science liaison is probably a good fit for you? It's something that you want to explore.
I think it was being in the position I was in before. I had always had a lot of medical science liaisons coming by and talking to me about obviously their products, their science, and their company. And had lots of people asking why I didn't jump into a medical science liaison position. And I think just meeting with them kind of helped me understand the role. But I had always worried about moving into an MSL role and I wouldn't have the same kind of patient impact. I'd no longer have face-to-face time with patients, so wouldn't have the same kind of effect. But it finally became time to move into a different position, moved into the MSL position, and then realized I'm no longer having an influence one patient at a time. But if I can actually go out and educate a clinician, I may have actually impacted several patients at that one time. So it was kind of a mind shift for me, but knowing I can still have a patient impact and kind of leads to why I got into healthcare in the first place, but being able to have a patient impact just at a different level and then potentially have an impact on what happens with in the future with a new medication coming out or with a new clinical trial being developed. So it kind of opens up the way you can do things and have your effect or have your impact.
Good, good, good. Thank you so much for sharing that. One of the things that we can agree on is that a lot of people don't know about medical science liaison, and even people that know it, it's still very difficult to get the role because it's very competitive, right? Based on your own experience, what are the kind of roles in the industry that can serve as a stepping stone or a link to get in the medical science liaison role?
I think some of the big links can really come from medical writing, really understanding the clinical trials and the way the information is produced, created, approved, and then ultimately published. Medical affairs departments have not only the medical writers, but they'll have a lot of medical editors. And these are individuals that kind of go in and help create some of the clinical trials. They start creating what we term assets. So as MSLs, we can go out and have slide decks that go through our new medications, our new indications, new adverse events, or ways to handle them. And we'll have individuals within medical affairs that create those slide decks and create those information packets. You'll also have individuals who have spent their lives in the laboratory looking at this one molecule, trying to get it to market. And they may now move into a medical director role. So they're kind of representing the molecule that they've had, how it's going to be utilized on the market, what kinds of trials we need to do next, and what kinds of information need to be produced. So there's lots of different roles. And as you go from company to company, all of these roles will have different names and potentially slightly different responsibilities. But they really all evolve around producing the information. Well, first of all, gathering the information, then producing it, then publishing it, and then going out and being able to talk about it.
Wow. So anybody that is available during those links can always eventually become a medical science liaison.
So, and we have a lot of individuals who are what we call a headquarters role, and these would be the medical directors, the medical leads, that move into an MSL role. We have a lot of MSLs that move into one of these headquarters roles. So there's a lot of roles that will change place. And that's been one of the surprising things to me in medical affairs is how many things open up once you get into a medical affairs position that you're potentially now eligible for, or that you now see that you didn't know about before. So if you decide one day you're bored as an MSL, you can move into another role within medical affairs. We've even had some MSLs or medical affairs personnel jump over into a sales role, which presents its own challenges because now you're not free to talk about everything you used to be able to talk about. So, that kind of becomes a challenge. But there's a lot of movement within companies, and then there's also a lot of movement between companies.
Good. Thank you. My last question for today, I don't want to take too much of your time. Last question. Based on everything that we've discussed and your experiences, what is the recommended job search strategy for an aspiring MSL? What would you recommend?
I think the best recommendation is just networking. And within that networking, just understanding it's going to take time to identify who you need to talk to, what positions they are, and then being able to talk to them well enough that you can get into that next step, which is potentially getting in with maybe one of the regional directors or hiring managers, or you're kind of walking through a step of, I'm talking to you to find out who I need to talk to next, who could then tell me who I need to talk to next. So it's really that networking piece, that conversational piece, with the understanding that it's probably not going to happen overnight. It's just going to take time. And I think during this networking, the other thing you learn is really how to deal with people on a different level, because I'm trying to have a nice conversation with you, but at the same time, I'm trying to get a job or trying to find out who I can talk to get a job. So learning how to do that, learning how to have those conversations so it never sounds like, well, I'm just talking to you so I can get a job, so hurry up.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I hope I didn't sound it like that when I was your mentee.
No, it was great. I enjoyed it.
Thank you so much. Dr. Jeffrey Liticker, are there any last thoughts, anything you want to say to our viewers as we wrap up?
The one thing I could say is, honestly, I think the MSL role is probably one of the greatest jobs you can find. And it truly is one of those jobs that becomes what you make of it. Because for me, I think it's become a really great job, because I used to work in the clinical pharmacy realm where I always wished I had more time to learn about the disease and study more. Now that I've got the MSL role, there's a lot of time to study, a lot of time to learn new things. So being able to take advantage of that has been great. It's just really availing yourself to that opportunity.
Wow. So opportunity to learn more about the disease state and the drug and that has been used, because medical science liaison are considered a very store of knowledge, a very viable repository station for knowledge and for experiences for this disease state and therapeutic area. And this role allow people the opportunity to read stuff, go to presentation, attend conferences, and just gain more knowledge. And that's so if you're somebody that really likes doing that, this might be a good role for you.
And of course, in doing that well, you become more of an expert for the KOLs that you're trying to call on. So you can have these deeper level discussions. You can get higher insight, higher rankings for insights. You can have insights that potentially provide more information just because of your level of understanding.
Wow. Wow. This is really nice. Thank you so much. I don't want to take more of your time. I really thank you for making us some time. Thank you so much. Thank you for being my mentor for a year last year. Thank you for showing up and still staying in contact with me again.
You are welcome. It's been great.
Thank you so much for this conversation. I will see you next time. Thank you.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.